All right, we're moving on now with the Tunica serosa. So the Tunica serosa is basically a thick layer that, oh, hold on a second, I'm getting my pen ready here so I can use it, is basically a part of the muscularis on the outside, the externa. And it's covered with the serous membrane, which is why it's called the serosa. And so the oral cavity, the pharynx, esophagus, all of these don't actually have tunica serosa. Instead, they have tunica adventiva, which is a whole lot of connective tissue, collagen and so forth, that attaches these regions to the surrounding structures. So oral cavity, the pharynx, the esophagus, that kind of makes sense, right? So the adventiva holds, say, for example, the esophagus in place. So all of these regions cooperate by allowing food to pass from your mouth through the body, and then the resulting waste products to be expelled from the body. So how is food moved through the body? Muscles of the GI tract move in two different ways, peristalsis and in segmentation. Basically, these are the two types of movements that allow food to be pushed through the digestive tract. So circular muscles in peristalsis basically coordinate, it's a series of coordinated contractions that move food downstream in what we call a bolus, or kind of a ball or a chunk. Segmentation, on the other hand, this is the churning that happens and mixing to allow material to mix with mucus and with digestive enzymes. So this picture shows you basically the initial state where you have a large bolus of food, and it's going to be moving from the mouth through the digestive tract, through the anus. So there's contraction of the muscle here that's going to move the food in this direction. When you have contraction here and food moving this way, the contractions then are followed by these longitudinal contractions here, which is then actually literally propelling the food forward. So the food can't go backwards, right? You can't do this because you have this region here contracted. So when you have basically a series of these circular contractions happening and longitudinal contractions, the food is propelled downwards through the digestive tract. On the other hand, with segmentation, you're going to have these longitudinal muscles this way contracting inwards and these relaxing in this direction. You have this happening in smaller and smaller regions, contracting in here, relaxation here, and that breaks up these large boluses into smaller regions, right? And these smaller regions then eventually start allowing mixing of each bolus individually. And this is segmentation. One bolus gets segmented into numerous little smaller boli. So how is the digestive tract attached to the abdominal cavity? Well, there are two parts of the peritoneum that hold the digestive tract in place. We have the parietal peritoneum. This lines the body cavity. All right, so parietal always has to do with the body cavity. And then we have the visceral peritoneum that lines the organs in the peritoneal cavity. So you kind of have an outside and an outer layer, which would be lining the whole cavity, and then the lining that it wraps around the individual organ itself. The mesenteries are folds and extensions of the peritoneum. So the mesenteries help stabilize, they attach the organs to the internal body wall. Sometimes you'll have a situation where the mesenteries help keep the intestines from getting tangled with one another. However, sometimes you can have an intestinal twist occur. So basically the mesenteries act kind of like an anchor holding the digestive tract in place. So we have the mesenteric proper itself holds the intestine to the abdominal wall, and specifically to the posterior aspect of the abdominal wall. We have the mesocolon. This holds the large intestine to the posterior, again, abdominal wall. The falciform ligament. This is a ligament, a piece of connective tissue that attaches the liver to the anterior abdominal wall, okay, and to the diaphragm. You'll see that in a few minutes. The falciform ligament is very important in holding the liver in place, keeping the liver stable. The lesser omentum, this suspends the duodenum. It actually separates the duodenum from the stomach and the liver. So we say it suspends, but basically it's a segment that keeps the duodenum separate from these portions of the digestive tract so that you can move around a little bit more easily. And the greater omentum from the stomach is part of the stomach, kind of hangs outside, hangs down, and it covers the intestines. So here's a sagittal section showing the adult mesenteries. So if you look at an adult through the side, basically, these are the proper mesenteries here. These regions are basically kind of like the curtains holding, or like, I don't know, to me it looks kind of like a curtain when you look at a mesentery because it's a thin membrane. Here's the lesser omentum, connecting the liver to the stomach, or at least kind of hanging them together. Here's the greater omentum here, wrapping around, attaching the stomach or hanging it together with the transverse colon, right? So this is content out. The parietal peritoneum, which is the external portion of the peritoneum lining the abdominal cavity here. The small intestine are all these little circles. All right. This is a female, so this is our the uterus. Here's the urinary bladder down here. The sigmoid colon is going to be attaching eventually up to the transverse colon. Here's the rectum, which is going to be a part of the terminal end of the digestive tract. The duodenum is going to be right here. And then here's the pancreas. So the pancreas look kind of odd here because we know that the pancreas lies behind the stomach. It's just usually when we're looking at an anterior view, you see the stomach first. So the retroperitoneal tissues are external to the peritoneal lining. So what does this mean? It's basically what we call a visceral peritoneum. Okay, remember peritoneums are those membranes, thin membranes. This is going to be covering the anterior surfaces. So much of what we were looking at before are attached to the posterior surfaces. Kidneys, adrenals, ureters, abdominal aorta, inferior vena cava, they're all covered by the retroperitoneal tissues. The rectum, ascending, descending colon, these are all held or fixed onto the dorsal part of the body wall, which is posterior. Remember, dorsal and posterior are the same, during development. So all these portions become a part of the backside, the posterior aspect of the abdominal cavity during development. So the GI tract itself can be divided into, again, our organs and structures, and then into accessory organs. So the organs or structures are going to be the oral cavity, your mouth, the pharynx, the back of your throat, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and then the large intestine or the colon. The accessory organs are organs that are things that you can survive without. However, it kind of makes digestion and eating food a lot easier. Salivary glands you're going to find in the mouth. The liver produces bile and some digestive agents. The gallbladder is just a storage vessel for bile. And then the pancreas makes a tremendous amount of digestive enzymes in addition to glucagon and insulin, which regulate metabolism. That's used separately. That's where the pancreas is being used as an agent forming hormones that are exocrine in nature. So the oral cavity is your mouth. It functions to bring food in. The mouth actually analyzes your material before swallowing. Your brain gets a tremendous amount of information regarding what you're consuming while it's sitting in your mouth. It's the first step of mechanical processing, which is basically chewing. Your teeth, your tongue, and the palatal surfaces, the roof of your mouth, are a part of oral cavity actions. Lubrication is basically the mixing of mucus and saliva. Salivary secretions are slightly different than mucus. There are different types of saliva. You might get to learn about that in physiology. The different types of saliva keep your mouth moist when you're not eating, but when you do eat, there's a separate type of saliva that's produced to help you digest complex carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates, and then there's another type of saliva that helps maintain the pH of your mouth so that you're basically, when you're eating, let's say, acidic compounds, it helps neutralize the acid. There is limited digestion via salivary amylase or salivary enzyme. Salivary amylase, digests carbohydrates. Oops, AR. So basically, digestion starts in the mouth. So the mouth itself has a whole lot of interesting things in it. We have the upper and the lower lips, okay, which help protect the opening of the mouth. So we have the mouth itself here. So here's the tongue, right? The tongue itself is made up of a huge amount of muscle. So we have the body of the tongue, the root of the tongue. We have parotid ducts, the opening of the parotid duct right here. The palatoglossal arch is kind of the arch that you see. You'll see it over here. The palatoglossal arch is the arch that you see, which is the opening to your pharynx. When you look inside the mouth, you see the dorsum of the tongue, so that's the top of the tongue. You'll see your cheek. The vestibule is the little dip here between your lip and where your teeth are. We'll talk about the teeth in another slide. Going back up to the top of your mouth, you have the nasal cavity up here. The hard palate is the bone or the roof of your mouth. The soft palate is the extension right here associated with the hard palate. The palatine tonsils is one group of tonsils. You have the entrance to the auditory tube or the eustachian tube. The pharyngeal tonsils or adenoids are associated with the auditory tube. The nasopharynx, which we had in the last chapter, is the junction between the nasal cavity and the oropharynx, which is the back of the throat right here. We have the faucets, the palatopharyngeal arch, which you can see right here, which you see over here. We looked at that. The oropharynx, the lingual tonsil right here. So we have tonsils right here. All the tonsils and the adenoids, or the pharyngeal tonsil, are associated with immunity. The epiglottis, which is going to separate terrible, right? Which is going to separate the flow of fluid and food down to the digestive tract versus the trachea, all right? And then we have the hyoid bone right here, which is attached to ligaments. If we look at the oral cavity in the anterior view, you'll see a lineup of teeth on the top and the bottom, our tongue, and you'll see the hard palate and so forth. I'll let you guys look at that yourself and study it for the lab exam. So the oral cavity is lined with oral mucosa. It is a non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. The cheeks are supported by what we call buccal fat pads and the buccinator muscles. The buccinator muscles are what allow us to chew. The fat pads help cushion and protect the mouth. And the cheek mucosa itself is continuous with the lips or the labia of the mouth. So the mucosa comes right to the edge of your lips. The labia has, the lips itself, or the labia, have the vermilion outline, which is the transition from the mucous membrane of the skin to the actual external portion. The labial frenulum is the folds of the mucosa as it attaches to the inner lip and the gum line itself. So the vestibule here, I missed the vestibule, is a region between the cheeks, the lips, and the teeth, and it's that small fold that I showed you on that last slide. The faucets are the opening leading to the oral pharynx. So that's basically the junction going down to the back of your throat. So the oral cavity itself, when you look inside the mouth, you have the hard palate, which is the maxilla, and the palatine bones, and that separates the oral from the nasal cavities. The soft palate separates the oral cavity from the nasal pharynx, and that helps you close off, to some degree, fluid while you're swallowing, so that it goes down through the esophagus, not up to your sinuses. The uvula is that little dangly portion associated with the soft palate, and it helps, again, keep food from going down into the pharynx. The soft palate is made of the palatal glottal arches, and we'll go into that in the next